Sounds good. Just checking the mic here. All right. Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. I just wanted to call the board meeting for for WestCat to order of April 10th, 2025. First, we'll do roll call, please.
Here.
Cameron Sassai.
Here.
Chris Kelly.
Here.
Gary Parsons.
Thank you very much. We'll now do the Pledge of Allegiance. If those who are willing to do so, please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. That moves us to item B, approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call, please. Oh, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Abstentions? Passes. Thank you. On to item C, public communications. Do we have any public comments? No public comments. We'll move to item 1, consent calendar. Do we have any items to be pulled at the moment? I do have one item to pull, that is 1.1, the minutes. Just minor corrections on item A. Just want to correct the spelling of my first name there on directors present. And then on the third page, just want to make sure for these minutes and also for future minutes, WCAT has been changed to WCCTC. So instead of advisory committee, it is now Transportation Commission. So it's WCCTC.
Ooh, fancy.
And that's the only corrections I have. Hey, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Second.
I'll second that.
Perfect. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Passes. Thank you. All right, now we are on to item number 2, regular items for board action discussion. First is 2.1, approval of amendment to employment agreement with General Manager Robert Thompson. Please go ahead.
No real staff report. This is just a follow-up from the last couple of meetings where this has been discussed in closed session. This item just needs to be approved, in front of the public. So that's just the item tonight.
Sounds good. Any questions from the board? All right, we'll go to public comments. Do we have any public comments for this item? There is none. We'll bring it back to board discussion. Any comments? If no comments, any motions?
I move to approve.
All right, motion.
Recommendation.
Second.
Motion second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Passes. Thank you. We'll now go on to item 2.2, presentation and discussion on WestCat evolution, public engagement. We'll pass on to staff.
Thank you. I'm just going to introduce our consultant, Ronnie Kraft, who's going to give this presentation. Let me just bring up the slideshow.
No? Oh, yeah. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Ronnie Kraft. This is my second time coming to you about this project. So at this, first I'm going to give a little prelude for WestCat Evolution, which is really a very intense look at the operations of WestCat services, giving it a fresh look at everything, all the routes and dial-a-ride. And, the whole big beginning of this is figuring out what is working currently and what's not to give us a basis. And so to that end, we're finding out what the community needs. And that's what we've been doing for the last 4 months. And that's what this meeting is about. We're also doing data analysis to understand, also what is working, what isn't, and what can be adjusted or, what needs to be changed. And there's a lot of great data that WestCat has to help that, and you'll see that also in this presentation. And just a little note that, there's lots of redesigns that have been done in the last 20 years, and for the most part, they've proven pretty successful in increasing ridership. So right now, I'm going to talk about next steps because it's relevant. And then I'll go through the public engagement results. I'm hoping that we can have a little bit of discussion on what you get and find from that. And then I'll move on to the line by line or route by route analysis, and we'll go through each route. Hopefully we'll have time to get through all of them. And then this is the project roadmap. So right now, we just completed public engagement, and we've started the service assessments and opportunities. So after this meeting and through this meeting, we're gonna start narrowing down what we're gonna look at, examining at a deeper level. And we're gonna be doing financial analysis of that, and basically coming up with these different scenarios for WestCat service to come and back and present to you and get input on. And, next is a marketing plan and then a whole thing, but that's not for a little bit. So I am a very happy consultant because we got so much input through the public engagement. We did a lot of things. We tried for a whole variety of activities so that we could get a diverse, amount. And so you can see we got, 642 responses to the onboard passenger survey. And I gotta tell you, that's just fantastic. So because of all of this, I don't have to make anything up. Everything that comes after this is gonna be based in what the community wants, as well as data analysis. So, on to the system-wide passenger survey findings. And just to preface, this is for system-wide because we're going to be talking about the route level later in the route-by-route analysis. If you have any questions, please interrupt me. If I don't know the answer, I'll write it down and get back to you. So, for the onboard passenger survey, we put blank surveys on buses. It was available in Spanish as well, and we incentivized it with a $500 gift card. And the woman that won was really excited. That's always fun. Okay. So about this data, what I need to tell you is that it's a convenience sample. It's not a random sample. And by convenience, I mean that the people who happened to ride and that wanted to respond did. So that's our 642. We didn't use a probability sampling method. And so the only thing we can't do is predict specifically from this data set. But it gives us, because there's so many, it gives us a really great basis to support planning decisions. And we can see trends. And so all of this is very, very informative, but not predictive. No caveat. Also, we allowed a lot of check all that apply questions, including for what route they use regularly and their trip purpose, a lot of them. And we did this to get sort of a general sense of riders' overall behavior rather than just a snapshot of what they are doing that day, to really, allow for the fact that a lot of people probably ride for different reasons and different purposes and on different routes. And so that, really gives us a more accurate picture of the real world usage. And so, yeah, I already said that. Next. This is, that being said, the proportion of routes that we got that people said they use regularly is roughly, proportionate to the actual proportion of routes that people ride in your ridership. And I just want to say, the JPX and JX are pretty off, but we got such a wealth of those responses that really it's not going to bias towards those. It just gives us better information about those routes. So, who are WestCat's passengers? A lot of them, most of them, are working adults and are employed. 60% are employed, another 17 part-time. We also have a lot of students. 8%, which said some other college. I'm guessing that's mostly Diablo Valley, right? And what's important to note is that a lot of them work non-traditional hours. You know, half of them start work before 7, and this is of workers. 42% work after 8 p.m., and 41% work on weekends, which is really important for us to know when we're thinking about span and weekend service. So there was, as you can see, there's a pretty broad age distribution. Of these age groups, it's pretty evenly sparsed out, and it encompasses all these different ages. There's a little bit lower ridership compared to the actual proportion of the service area of residents among older adults, but that's normal to be expected, and there's other services that get older adults around. Another thing of note on this slide is that a third of your passengers speak a language other than English at home. So you have some very loyal customers and frequent riders. There's 90% of passengers ride at least 3 days a week. That's a lot. And 42% ride exactly 5 days a week. And even though there's limited service on weekends, 15% ride 6 or 7 days a week. And almost half have been riding for longer than 5 years. So in terms of trip purpose, again, passengers could select more than one. Commuting is your bread and butter. 77% ride to commute, and this varies by route quite a bit, with a ton more on links, which is to be expected. 55% of all the surveys, of all the respondents, only use WestCat for work, meaning they only selected one trip purpose. So that's over half. And so for the people that selected more than one trip, recreation pops right up to second place. That's the blue on there. And you can see it's much more spread out along the different uses, including medical. So most passengers are transferring to or from a different transit system, 72%. It's also very important for us to know. This shows, the routes by common linkages with other systems, and BART, unsurprisingly, is way up there. 57% of total respondents ride WestCat and BART together. There's, AC Transit, even all of the routes had at least 15 people that ride with BART on a regular basis. We're asking them about their usual trips. And, 15% ride Muni as well. So obviously that's higher for the links, which is there in the middle. Okay. So how are they getting to WestCat? Well, most people are walking to their first WestCat bus stop and then driving, about 20% there. Very few bike, 3.6. And but this graph changes significantly when you look at it by route level. We'll get to that. So 54% of passengers could have driven or gotten a ride for the trip they were currently on. That's pretty much the question wording of how we asked it. And that's a very big proportion. 65% have a driver's license, plus 57% have a driver's license and access to a vehicle. But there are also a decent amount of passengers that don't have access to a vehicle or don't have a driver's license, so it's important. And I want to make sure that when I say what I'm about to say is that I'm not implying that there's a binary. What I'm going to say is that a lot of your riders have the choice to ride WestCat, and they're choosing to. That doesn't mean that there's only one other option. What I'm saying is that the community has a lot of options for transportation, and a big chunk of yours are choosing WestCat over other modes. Okay. To that, for most, WestCat isn't the right of last resort. We asked, how would you have made this trip without WestCat? Most of the responses are driving modes. Drive alone, Uber, Lyft, get a ride. Only 15%, a little less, would not have made the trip without WestCat. That's pretty good. Also, because the most common ways to get around without WestCat are driving modes, I'm pretty sure that we can say that WestCat reduces traffic congestion in the area. We also asked passengers how they would be getting around a year from now. Whether they're going to buy a car and stop riding, buy a car and keep riding, just keep riding WestCat. And 88% said that they would still be riding WestCat in a year. Okay, so now we asked passengers in this survey, and you have a copy of the survey if you want to look at it. It's the black and white piece of paper. A whole bunch of service aspects, and asked them to rate them from poor to excellent. And so WestCat did really well. That big red arrow is pointing out that the question, which was at the end of the ratings, how would you rate WestCat overall, was actually the highest or second highest average rating of all of these different service aspects. First was courtesy and helpfulness of the bus drivers, which is fantastic, and that's usually the case. Evening, weekend, and frequency-related service elements are rated a bit lower. And then, routing and bus stop placement are working, but we'll just keep an eye on those because they're more towards the bottom. Oh, sorry. Availability of weekend service was at the bottom, which makes sense. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about some of the potential improvements and opportunities that we asked about in the onboard survey. So again, we gave them a list of potential improvements and asked people to rate them on a scale of 1 not important to 7 very important. And, at the very top is real-time information. And you're going to hear this from me multiple times during this presentation. Having real-time information at stops, but also in general, is just very supported by WestCat passengers. We also asked the survey respondents, if you had to just pick one of that list that is the most important to you, you had to pick only one, it was the second top choice for which would be the most important to them personally. There's also a fair amount of open-ended questions throughout, but there's 3 in the onboard survey, and one specifically asking about communication. What can WestCat do to improve communication with you? And at the top was real-time information. And I found, while doing all this outreach and talking to people, there's a surprising amount of people that don't know that you can check when the bus is coming on Google Maps. It came up a lot. So that's something we can help. So, okay, next. So that was at the top. Now, improving frequency was often a contender for first or second place. It's, more frequent service on the route you ride most often was one of the choices. And we had people say what was the route they rode most often. And not shocking, it's the 4 most, popular routes. And in addition to that one, there was also a frequency-based improvement. More routes that come every 15 minutes from 7 to 7 was also very highly rated. And I think it's to note that, it's very important to note that, at the bottom, so less important, was expansion to unserved areas, so places that WestCat doesn't currently serve. additional routes on weekends, which we're going to hear a lot of conflicting information about weekend service. And then also, a new service model, which is essentially microtransit, which is, an on-demand, door-to-door sort of service that operates in a small area. So that's really good for us to know for future assessments. So we also asked an open-ended question towards the end of the survey. Where do you want or need WestCat to go the most? And BART was, at the top. The good thing is that most of the things at the top were all areas that WestCat already goes to. So there's BART. There were some mentions about aligning better with the schedules. And then San Francisco got a lot of mentions. And then, weekend service and more evening service on links came up quite a bit. But then there was also requests for various East Bay cities, and they were kind of spread out. There wasn't one of these cities that really took the top. Again, within the WestCat service area, people named various neighborhoods. And then there was identification of a few shopping commercial areas and then college, but these on the right were where there were lower requests, numbers of requests. And so the last question we asked in our survey is, what one change, people didn't stick to that, but one change would you most like WestCat to make? And so here they are categorized. You're not supposed to be able to read that, but it's just to show you that by topic, they're pretty spread out. Reliability and on-time performance was at the top on its own, but you can see extended service hours got quite a lot of mentions as well, including weekend and late night service. A lot of positive, just nothing. You can't do anything to change your great kind of comments. And then, again, towards the top, more frequent service, real time is in there. Some comments on infrastructure and comfort, like, change the AC, or I would like a bus stop shelter someplace. And then, again, sort of at the bottom is service coverage expansion, like, covering different areas. Okay. That was it for the onboard survey. Any questions? Okay, through that. So we also decided to have an online survey that was targeted towards non-riders, but it was open to everyone. But really, we were trying to get at the people that we didn't reach with the onboard survey. And so we had it, again, available in English and Spanish online on the WestCat website. It was pretty short, 5 to 10 minutes. We got 230 responses from it. Again, really great. And of those, 179 that were not regular, currently WestCat riders. And we advertised this online survey far and wide. We sent out a postcard with the link to this survey to 27,000 households and businesses that are in the WestCat service area, the whole thing. We emailed it out, and a bunch of our stakeholder, helpers, like the cities, senior center, emailed it out to their email lists or put it up in their facilities. And I think that's why we were so successful with this, because usually online surveys don't get a whole lot of hits. And so what we did, see that little orange pie piece? Those are the people that ride WestCat regularly that said they did. And we asked that right up front. And then we separated them out and sent them to a question that was an open-ended response, pretty much the same exact question that was at the end of the onboard survey. What can we do better to help you? What is the most important thing? And so I've lumped those in with the passenger open-ended things, and they've been evaluated in that area. So for the rest of this, talking about the non-rider survey, they actually are non-riders. That's what we're looking at. Okay, so why aren't you riding WestCat? Most of the reasons, again, the top two reasons had to do with compared to driving, they don't want it, they'd rather drive. Have a car, can get a ride, it's too long compared to driving. But I think it's significant that about a quarter said that there's, no bus routes near them, and that the service hours don't match needs. That's something, that's important and we need to pay attention to. And so we also asked, communication, part of this study is looking at, what is the level of awareness of WestCat in the community and how is it perceived? And so we asked, what do you think on how can we best get information to you since you don't really you're only somewhat familiar, how can we change that? And, there's a very strong preference for digital mediums, 90% for the WestCat website, so that's great because there is one. And, there's also a fair amount of people that wanted physical information, at stops or printed schedules. People still very much like that, especially in the context of writing. And then, there's a fair amount that said there could be more presence on social media or like through community organizations to sort of get the level of awareness up there. So, is there anything that WestCat can do to make you consider using it? More frequent service was at the top, and real-time information was at the top. And, almost a third of the non-riders emphasized the need for better connections to other transit systems. That's good for us to know and something that we'll be looking into because it's come up a few other times too. And it really makes sense given what we found in the existing conditions analysis that a huge proportion of people that work and that live in the service area but also work outside of the service area. And back to the finding that 77% of passengers are transferring to a different system. So this is a huge opportunity right there. Okay. Customer requests. This is what WestCat calls like the people that call in and give comments or sometimes complain or sometimes give praise to the customer service line, and there's also an online portal. And luckily all of that is recorded. And so I looked through the last 13 months of customer requests. And there was 337 that were relevant, but most of them had to do with operations, late bus, early bus, that sort of thing. But there were some about comments that were really helpful for this analysis. And the top ones had to do with improved communication. Okay, good to know. Riders want, more information about, when there's service disruptions. Again, a signage at stops, the physical information, real-time information. Later evening and weekend service came up, especially for links. And then also one that's helpful is better alignment with school schedules. So school service and that exact topic is, one of the things that we'll be looking at deeper as we go on. That's it. So, open houses. So we held 2 open houses, one on a Wednesday evening and one on a Saturday midday. They each got about 20 to 25 attendees, which is really great. I expected less. Sometimes when you hold an event and think people are going to come to you, they don't, but they did. This open house was also advertised through that huge mailing and along with the survey. And we got all sorts of people. I think it helps that we included snacks and beverages. And, you know, let's see. It was also published far and wide by our, you know, helpful stakeholder agencies and organizations. And so we had some stations with just information about the project, 3 of those, but mainly it was meant to be an interactive experience. And so we had different interactive stations. A couple were map-based, so people could look at a map and put post-its specifically where things were. Some were just general comments, like you could put it on a sticky note, put it up on a board. We got a lot of input from that. And then we also asked 4 of the trade-off questions. And I am about to get into the trade-off questions, but you'll know what I'm talking about in a second. Okay. Oh, and we also had a lot of conversations, all of the staff, with people that came. It was very productive. So one of the things that was unique to the open houses is we asked people to rank these same potential improvements, but we gave them a red, orange, and yellow sticker and asked them to rate from most important, second priority, third priority. And so this graph shows the results of those with, you know, the weighting of each priority. And more frequent bus service on the weekends was actually the top with the weighted results. Let's see. It's actually quite farther on the top. More late night service on both local and BART serving routes, and additional weekend routes were pretty high up there. Real-time information was actually sort of in the middle. And again, you know, expanding to underserved areas was towards the bottom. The sample size was was very small. Like I said, 20 to 25 people showed up. Not all of them did this. So this is more qualitative for us. Okay, now to these trade-offs. First, does anyone have any questions? Okay. So these are hugely important. If you were here last time, you remember the next slide, which is, you know, when we're planning transit services, transportation planners, transit agencies, everyone involved, you guys, we have to make certain judgments on various trade-offs because we can't have service that goes everywhere and it also comes every 15 minutes. It's just not feasible. And so at the top, the trade-off is coverage, geographic, versus ridership. And what this is showing is that there's, you know, all of those trade-offs are important, but really this is the meat. Do we plan for ridership with the goal of getting as many people on at a time? It's more, you know, bang per buck. That's the goal for the ridership goal. And there's ways to plan for that, putting transit only in dense areas and frequent. And there's also a coverage goal, though. And that is geographically and sometimes also span of hours in a day, making it equitable and access. And, you know, this kind of service often provides a safety net and involves, you know, usually has lower riders, but it's also important. And most transit agencies usually strike a balance between the two. There's hardly any that go for, you know, one or the other. And WestCat currently has both of these, with the local routes primarily serving the coverage goal. And so I want you to, you know, keep this in mind because it's a policy direction, but we're going to be able to make this judgment when we're planning service and which proportion we go towards, you know, each goal based on all of this feedback. So we asked 5 questions trying to get at people's preference between these trade-offs. And I'm going to tell you the overall findings for these 5 for the whole batch of surveys. But then we'll go into the route ones. So overall, people want frequency more than coverage. But it's not an insignificant amount of people that value coverage, 32%. But that's where it's leaning right now. Again, coverage gets a little bit less than frequency. So it's kind of in the opposite direction. But again, you know, frequency wins out. Oh, and I should say on the last one, the open house actually had opposite numbers. But, you know, there was also only 26 or 24 people at the open house. So the next one has to do with running peak service, so frequent peak service, but then infrequent off-peak service, or during, you know, the whole span of the day, run the same amount of service at a slightly, you know, at a medium amount of frequency. And, you know, kind of surprising to me, given how many commuters you have, it seems that, you know, in a lot of ways that people prefer steady all-day service, which I think also probably speaks to the changing work hours. And so the next one is specifically talking about BART on weekends and whether people want it to be more frequent or run later in the evening. And you can see that it's very slight preference for more frequent service during the current hours. And then last, we have one looking at regional versus local service. You know, this is definitely something that we need to decide going forward, is how much of WestCat resources do we put into each of these types of services. And, you know, again, there's a pretty much a very similar split of, you know, 68-32, 70-30. And the results of this one, as you can probably guess, varied quite a bit by route. And we didn't have that one at the open house, so. Okay, so that is public engagement very quickly. I wanted to see, I know that that was a lot in a short amount of time, but did anything stand out to you? Were you surprised, or did anything confirm what you were already thinking? And really, most importantly, are there any themes that you think we should carry forward into this next phase of the project?
Thanks for the presentation, appreciate it. And I think first off, thanks staff for your work and staff for their work, not just with, of course, these surveys, but also the work into getting those graphics out and literature, and also the public engagement in-person meetings as well was really important to getting that many respondents. So thank you for that. Any discussion? I know we have Director Kelly. Go ahead first. Just any respondents to the questions there, and any general questions you have?
Well, I would just say this is not surprising. You know, I used to ride Lynx when I worked in San Francisco. And so, and I've taken, you know, like the JX and the JPX over to a Del Norte station. I do think the having the real-time information is really, really important, and I can understand. Now, I believe that WestCat does use an app. Is it the Transit app, or which one is it?
Our information is available on Transit app.
On the Transit app. So one suggestion I would make, if it's possible, is could we have an app that says the WestCat Transit app and that connects to the information provided by Transit, because people may not realize. You know, there's a bunch of transit apps out there, and if there was something that we had for WestCat, it might be more readily used. And I do know that people really, you know, if the bus is going to be late, you just want to know it's going to be late, and how late is it going to be. Mm-hmm. And that's really, really important to a whole lot of people.
Yeah.
And I also agree that frequency is really, really important. And maybe throughout the day, as you suggest, with people working different kinds of hours and working on the weekends, that's important. I know that it's really hard to have the links on the weekends because the travel times are just not predictable, and that's because of the traffic, you know, on the freeway and on the bridge. We can't sail through in a clear way, and it's really, really hard to do that. So just a couple of comments there.
Thank you for that. I think on your first point that you mentioned, which is the real-time information that's available on an app. Is there a regional transit app that just connects all the different transit agencies?
Google.
Just Google with
Google or Transit app. I think most agencies are on Transit app at this point, but to Ronnie's point, Google has all the information. Any agency that has a real-time feeds into all of these various apps.
Mm-hmm. And if it's not able to be implemented on that, of course, any way that we can, I mean, what is WestCat doing to sort of communicate the availability of that app right now? Is it through like a QR code that's at every bus stop, or just in the buses that we have, a QR code or a website?
I think this was something we were having an internal discussion on yesterday about improving the information on the website to direct people to the Transit app. You know, we have a text alert system. We were thinking about putting a message out, but I think overall we're trying to promote. I think our direction is to go and promote people to use the Transit app because that seems to be the most reliable source going forward. So I think it's a work in progress, I guess, is the answer.
Sure. Thank you. Any other questions from directors? Sure.
I was glad that I didn't have an influence on a lot of the people that answered the questionnaire because the things that were my concern were at the top, so that was great. Frequency and being able to know when the bus is coming. And then there was another part of the study, and Aleda Chavez, who I can attribute part of this to from many years ago when I was on the board before, an advocate to try and get bus service to other areas like Emeryville, Oakland, Berkeley. So I don't know if that's why you're here this evening, but I was like, here's a win based on the studies from the ridership, which is even, I think, more important than someone that doesn't understand the service area or rides the buses. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions?
Comment. So thank you for the report. I love qualitative information, and I appreciate that you had mixed methods to collect the data. So that speaks to the interest that WestCat has had to serve varied individuals at different levels of literacy and at different language capabilities. And so in the interest of trying to quell arguments that would have this kind of information be less important than what it is, what I'd like to see is, I'll give an example of information to be sought a little more in depth, in particular with a size of 24 in the open houses
Each.
and the core of the kinds of considerations that we need to make. When I saw your boards with those two, it's either one or another, that we have to think policy-wise. You know, I hadn't gone to the survey before then it was just, you hit it on the mark with those questions. And so the groups of 24 times 2 or 24 total?
Each.
Each, okay. 50 out of a mailing of 27,000. You can anticipate that someone's going to say something about that, right? That it may or may not reflect entirely, or that we're going to make decisions based on a very small size. So however you can help us address that.
Okay, so I didn't make this super clear, but no, the onboard survey has all 5 trade-offs. So we got 600 and something responses. I was just adding in the open houses because didn't want to leave them out.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I would have a problem with that too.
That was really, until you clarified that was the one thing that occurred to me. Many of the responses confirmed some of what just sample of one, as we all are writers at some point, and comparing the experiences with other transit systems out of the area. And it doesn't compare because WestCat is relatively small. My comparison is Los Angeles and that transit system. And the beauty of that transit system, as wide and open as the LA area is indeed the frequency. And so it's often that waiting time that deters people, I think, from writing. And so I think to somehow the responses given or the interest given in having more or reliable service, meshes with that notion of wanting to get somewhere on a route familiar to the writer, not necessarily to enhance the geographic area, but to get the writer to where they need to be. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. One more. Go ahead.
Cameron, I agree with you about maybe putting QR codes at the bus stops if you could, because then to lead to the transit app, because then that would let people know, hey, I can use this, and then I can check on when the bus is really going to be here in real time. I think that would help a heck of a lot.
And I think a lot cheaper than having those real-time information units.
Yeah, that's just really hard to do for us. So if people can access, or if there's a Google link to real-time information, put that as a QR code on the bus stops, if that's possible.
This is going to be something that we're doing a deep dive into for especially the marketing plan. But this has come up, and so we're going to be focusing for sure on what the best methods and the most affordable methods for WestCat will be to get this, in for the real-time information that is already out there, more known, and accessible.
Thank you for that. I have a few questions. If we can go back to the slide that says, where do you need the WestCat buses to go the most?
Mm-hmm.
You can find that.
Right before, there you go. Oh,
There it is.
Right before. Yeah.
Perfect. Do you happen to have a breakdown of how many respondents named each particular option there?
I do.
Do. Okay. I'm curious with the colleges that are mentioned, Contra Costa College, DVC, and UC Berkeley. How many? What is the breakdown there of those entries?
Okay. Do you want me to send it to you?
Yes,
I'll
please,
have it right here.
That'd be great. I think that's really important information in terms of it says East Bay cities. I'm curious as to why Concord, Martinez, Walnut Creek, Oakland, Berkeley, Richmond. I'm guessing some of those. I mean, only an assumption, but this maybe they want to come to, or they work there. But then what sticks out to maybe is Martinez in terms of just like maybe access to Amtrak. Maybe Richmond as well. Yeah.
Well, I think that people want to go to Martinez so they can transfer over to get a county connection bus over to DVC. And I know that's a frustration for some people who live out here and they want to go to DVC. It just takes forever to get there.
Yeah.
Oh.
There was a surprising amount of responses in the open-ended responses from all of the different methods requesting service that there already is happening. So I think that's something for us to pay attention to.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Just to back up Chris Kelly on the QR code, the first one I ever saw, County Connection actually has, so that is an extremely helpful thing if we can adopt that with our little signs that have started to pop up throughout our service area.
Yeah. If I see a QR code there, I'm more likely to, if it links to download the app, I'm more likely to do that. Whereas, okay, I don't have any real-time information. I'm going to go to the App Store to see if there's a WestCat app. I think that's a lot of people that don't have that attention span. I don't, for sure. Other things I have as well, the surveys itself, they were only accessible in English and Spanish. Is that correct?
Right.
Gotcha. Was there a barrier to, like a cost barrier to having more languages there just for equal access?
Yeah, absolutely. But also, there's always the language line that we could have had people call up if they want to take the survey and do it in whatever language.
So that was accessible for folks if they saw this and didn't speak this language.
Not specifically on the survey, but on all of the other outreach materials, we say that there's availability for
Gotcha.
4 and more languages.
Thank you for that. I think we had a good number of responses. I think always want to be mindful of equal access to
Right.
this, also just input for data as well is always important.
Yeah.
We haven't even gotten into equal access for like those who are visually impaired. Do we have a Braille version, right? So just things to be mindful of. It's a comment I have.
And I should know, I think there were 13 that we got back in Spanish.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. Any other questions from the board? Right. Do we have any public comment?
So, sorry, before I believe there's still more of this presentation to go. I think
yeah.
There's a bit more
Oh,
depth, so
okay.
sorry.
That was half.
Perfect. Okay.
Sorry.
We're done.
Actually, how much time do I have? Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, thank you for that conversation. Now is the line-by-line analysis. And again, we're doing this analysis because we're trying to find out what is currently working. And there's a fair amount that is. And so I'm going to start with the most important routes first. No, the largest ridership routes first. And then we'll go on to regional and then local. So first we have links. I don't need to tell you about it, but that information is there. And so this chart shows what the ridership is like, the boardings. And so you can see its peak time. Nothing else should be inferred from this graph other than the pattern of ridership. It has a very high ridership count and a high number of passengers per hour. And it's got a comparatively high proportion of riders that actually ride less, 1 to 2 days a week and 3 to 4 days a week than all of the other routes. And 91%, the highest proportion of all the routes, travel for work, which is not surprising. So looking at connections and transfers, it has the much highest proportion that drive to the first stop, which is 55%, much higher than any of the other routes, and the lowest that walk, conversely. 65% of people using links are transferring to Muni. That's really interesting. And of all the routes, it's the least used in conjunction with other routes, meaning there was the most people only ride that route, ride links. And I'm sorry. So in terms of the service priorities, here are those trade-offs again. There's a strong preference for regional. You can see that circled at the bottom. Shocker. And 68%, higher than average, could have driven or gotten a ride. Makes sense. And 81% have a driver's license and a vehicle available of links riders. So it's a lot of confirmation of what we probably guessed. So in terms of improvements or opportunities for links, we found from the onboard survey that, the availability of weekend service is ranked very low in terms of people satisfaction, which makes sense, but is rated very high for directness of routes. And it got a pretty high rating, or very high rating for how do you like WestCat overall. Surprising to me, and this is what I mean when we're going to see sort of mixed comments, is that the potential improvement for increasing weekend frequency and having additional routes running on weekends was actually rated very low by links riders. I don't, it seemed like maybe there's a bunch happy with how it is. I don't know, but it was also, one of the things we heard the opposite of quite a bit. High importance for real-time information. I might just stop. I'm going to skip real-time information comments from now on and just believe me that they're at the top. And then, overall, it actually had the lowest importance ratings for all of the improvements. So maybe people are just super happy with links and leave it at that. All right, on to the regional express routes, the JPX, and JX. So these graphs show the ridership patterns. On the top left is weekdays. You can see pretty strong peaks during commute hours. Saturday, I don't know what's going on with that one yellow, but ridership is lower and steadier. And then on Sunday, again, there's some peaks, but also a pretty big bound in the middle. So it looks like a lot of ridership on Sunday. The J, which I'm referring to both J routes as the J, has the total highest ridership for all of the system. It has pretty high weekend ridership on both days. And 68% of J riders ride 5 or more days per week. So for connections, there's a lot of people who ride J with the other 2 J routes, but also with C3. Half of J riders transfer to AC Transit, which that's a very high amount, but it makes sense being at the BART station. 22% of J riders trips actually begin from transferring from another route. And then for service priorities, J riders very much value frequency. You can see at the top. And if I don't mention any of the other priorities, it's because it was pretty much in line with the system average. And it had J had one of the highest ratings for the service overall. People are really happy with it. So in terms of potential improvements, about 20% said weekend frequency was very important. That's a lot more than the system average. And frequent service on the route used most often was high overall, but especially on the J. And so remember that potential improvement at the very bottom there, the frequent service, allowed people to write in which route they ride most often. And then from additional public engagement results, we heard at the open houses a lot of people requesting more frequent service. Okay. JPX runs on weekdays. Very interesting ridership patterns, especially since it's not running during the middle of some of those. But, it operates, oh no, that's JX, sorry, that one's fine. It's less curved towards peaks, but you can see where in the morning it's going one direction and in the evening it's going the other. It has, again, a very high ridership and passengers per service hour compared to most of the other routes. It's got 78% of people who use it for work. And, it's got more than half of the riders travel for 5 or more days per week. It's a lot of usage. In terms of connections, there's, a high transfer rate to BART, which let's hope so. And then there's a lot of usage with the other 2 J routes. It's not very important. And then in terms of the system, the trade-off priorities is pretty similar to the system. But, there was also, we got a lot of JPX surveys back. Oh, and a lot of people drive to their first stop comparatively to other routes, 15%. In terms of improvements, again, frequency came up the highest. It was very highly rated by JPX riders. And real-time information. And then a lot of people in the open-ended comments from across the different activities brought up alignment with BART schedules. Okay, the JX. Now here's those 2 peaks of when the JX actually is running. It actually has a relatively low number of passengers per hour, especially compared to the other regional express routes. Huge amount, 82% ride for work. And about the average could have driven or gotten a ride instead of taking the JX. Again, high rate of transfers to BART. And this one had the highest amount, other than links, of people that drive to the stop to get to their first WestCat stop, 19%. In terms of the service priorities, again, strong preference for frequency. And then also of note is that an above average proportion had both a license and a vehicle available. So for improvements, frequency, real-time information, and then a lot of people through the open-ended comments said it would be great if it ran throughout the day and not just peak hours. Skip that, please. There we go. All right, we're on to the local fixed routes. There's 8 of these. And we're going to start with Route 10. So the passengers per hour is pretty similar to the other local routes. And I don't know if you happen to have it, but that was sent out with the agenda packet, there's 8 matrices. And the first one shows you performance statistics for each route. But if you have a question, I have one here so I can find it. About half travel 5 days per week on the Route 10. And a lot of them use Route 10 for work. There's a lot of people that ride Route 10 and transfer to BART and ride the JPX and JX, which is all in alignment. For the service priorities, a lot more preferred frequent service compared to coverage, which is kind of surprising it being a local route. A lot of people wanted more frequent service over having the road closest to them. It's actually the strongest proportion that wanted that of all of the routes. And there was lower interest compared to the average in expanding to unserved areas or on-demand service. So in terms of potential improvements, frequency, real-time information, and more frequent service on specifically Route 10. So that's something that, we'll be examining further. Now Route 11. So a lot of Route 11 riders have been riding for a while. About half have been riding for 5+ years. It also operates on Saturdays and has a pretty low passengers per hour for Saturdays specifically. It's kind of the bottom. It's much lower than the J routes or the 19. It's not much lower than 19, but it's lower. There is a higher share of middle and high school aged and a higher proportion of people traveling for medical appointments on Route 11. And so for connections, 91% of riders walk or use a wheelchair to access the route, which is one of the highest for the routes. In terms of service priorities, they have a higher than average favor for late night service over frequency for J on weekends, that second one. The fourth one, the second circle. And they have a higher preference for additional service to local destinations than other routes. So from the onboard survey, they have above average ratings for more frequent bus service on weekends. So that makes sense. It runs on weekends. They just want more of it. And the open-ended comments, again, talked about frequency. I think you're going to see a pattern here, especially for local routes which don't run as frequently. On to 12. So 60% of riders on 12 ride 5 days per week, which is higher than the average. And a pretty higher proportion ride for or middle or high school, and 13% for college, which is above average. And the inbound service is showing peaks for morning and school and evening commute times. A slightly higher amount of people drive to access Route 12, 13%. 45% of Route 12 riders also regularly use AC Transit. And there's nothing different about their priorities. So I'm going to say it because they have especially high ratings for real-time information. And there was a lot of open-ended comments that included not just frequency, but all over the place in terms of want earlier service, want later service, want weekend service, especially for Route 12. So, not a ton of each people saying that, but it was really varied. And people that rode Route 12 had cared less about having late night service to BART on weekends. Route 15, thanks for sticking with me. About half of Route 15 riders ride 5 days a week, and 11% use a bike, which is the highest of any of the routes. So, because I think the average was 3.6. So this route sees some bicycle ridership. It's, frequently used with AC Transit and BART, 81%. And for priorities, there was a much higher than this average preference for late night evening service on BART. And the bottom one between local and regional was actually pretty much even, that and the top one, which is not how the case was for the overall. So riders on 15 are pretty split. They had, for all of the potential improvements listed in the onboard survey, they had moderate to high ratings for all of them. And then frequency came up the most, as it did for all of them. Okay, Route 16. We're getting through. Let's see. So among the local routes, it has the second highest total ridership. It has a very long average trip length in minutes, but not an actually long distance. Because of this, it has a pretty high cost per mile, which is something I've not brought up because it's not super remarkable, but for this one it is. And it has a high amount of people that could have driven or gotten a ride instead of riding Route 16. A huge amount, 85%, walk or wheelchair to reach Route 16. And riders have a much higher preference for weekend frequency over later service to BART. And then again, regional and local service is pretty much near equal. So additional routes running on weekends was actually ranked pretty high by Route 16 riders. And many called for more evening and weekend service on Route 16. And, for how do you rate WestCat overall, Route 16 had one of the highest average ratings. Okay, Route 19. Route 19 only runs on Saturdays. It has the highest proportion of people that ride more than 6 days a week, or 6 or more days a week, which makes sense. 81% are riding for work, which is, somewhat in line with what we found at the other part of the survey, asking when people are, going to work, and 41% said we work on weekends, 42%. So probably these are some of those people. And then it also has a very high proportion of passengers that rides at 19 for medical purposes. Okay, so for connections, it's most commonly used with AC Transit and County Connection, one of the highest for County Connection. It's usually also a lot of 19 riders rides Route 16. And 17% usually transfer from another route to ride Route 19. And so on the top one, this is one of the few routes where the majority of passengers actually prefer coverage, geographic coverage over frequency. That's important. And so this is why we're doing this, to see what the differences are. And it has a pretty low proportion of people that could have driven or gotten a ride for the trip they were on. Frequency, just like all of them, Route 19 wants frequency, but there was also a higher importance placed on expanding to underserved or unserved areas and faster travel in general, more so than the other routes. And again, it had a very high rating for service overall. Okay. 30Z, we're on the second to last. It has the lower total ridership. It also comes less frequently. And it had lower passengers per revenue hour compared to other routes. it's in with the locals, but technically it does go outside of the WestCat service area. It had a decent portion, 36%, pretty high, of people that ride 6 or more days per week. And it had less people that use WestCat for work, 67%. It had the highest number of people that transfer from another WestCat route to get to their first stop. It's not supposed to be WestCat, another system to get to their first stop, which makes sense since it goes to Martinez and connects with County Connection. And again, this is actually the only other route. 70% prefer geographic coverage over frequency for Route 30Z riders. And only 24% have a driver's license and vehicle access, which is much lower than the system average. So they had pretty broadly distributed important improvements. So different about 30Z is how early the bus operates on weekdays was one of the things that we asked about current service. How would you rate that? And 30Z had very high opinions of that factor. All right, last one, C3. Again, another one that's sort of local but goes outside of the service area. It has the highest total ridership and the highest number of passengers per revenue hour of the local routes. And, 31% ride for college or vocational purposes. I'd hope so, since it's going to a school. And there actually was pretty high transfers with the JLJR and the JPX, as well as 71% transferring to or from Muni. And it had a much below average proportion of people that transfer to get to their first WestCat stop. And then in terms of the service priorities, the top one, I don't have a circle, they're actually pretty split, pretty balanced between coverage and frequency. Everything else is pretty in line with the system averages. So, again, frequent, wait, is this the same one? Yeah. The on-demand service already, an expansion to unserved areas, those as potential improvements already were pretty low, but they were especially low interest to Route C3 riders. And a few open-ended comments wanted increases in service, again, sort of all over the map, earlier, later, weekend. But also there was a few that wanted extensions outside of the service area to Richmond, to the ferry, specifically for C3. Thank you so much for going through that with me. This is what we're working with right now, and we'll be narrowing scope based on all this tons of data that we have.
Thank you so much. Do you have any questions from the board on that last part of the presentation? Yeah, go ahead. Or comments?
Yeah, I think both parts of the presentation. Because earlier you asked if there were any surprises.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at the questions on the survey. And number one was an open-ended one. So were there any surprise to me, unless the responses appear in the data and not so many that they weren't presented, but it seems like the pricing on the fares are at the right point, unless you can tell us otherwise, that there were comments, but where it answered the question, what one change would you most like WestCat to make? Were there 0 comments about pricing? I'm real curious about that.
I can't think of a single one. I can definitely check, but it was in no way a theme that came up often. But I I mean, I've read through every single one, so I think I would remember. But yeah, I think, that speaks to, one, just how low WestCat's, fares are, which is very low
Well-
comparatively. And all of these people write other systems, so they know how high it could be.
And I was going to respond to how, speaks to how low they are. Well, that's relative.
Right.
Some people write other lines and some people don't. But I think there will be the temptation to propose that the prices be altered somehow, given the situation that we find ourselves in. And so whether, not among us probably, but otherwise. So if the next phase of this study would include some of questions related to how well pricing is, and I'm calling it pricing because I think of marketing, but it's the fares.
Right.
The fares are fair to our ridership as far as we know, FAIR fair. And they're well accepted. People are receptive to it. Could we have riders be as receptive if we made any changes? That's going to be a question
Well,
that is going to be on someone's mind, I'm sure.
that's a whole study. A fare analysis study is a big effort to really get at the root of that, and that was not included in this project.
Okay, so I'm thinking about comments that I heard at the one event that I attended, and so just raising the point that it's surprising to me how well received then. So one way we could frame this: the fares are among those who responded to the survey. I would not discount that.
Thank you, Director Kelly.
Thank you. I would just say on the subject of fares, the ferry, the WITA ferry, when they cut their fares in half, they saw ridership go up. And I was recently at a Capital Corridor meeting for the train, and they were talking about cutting their fares, at least on short-term hops. So I don't know if we would really achieve anything by having much higher fares. We might lose a lot of people. So that's just one comment there. Ms. Kraft, so when you look at all of these different routes, does anything surprise you or stand out to you? One thing that I have noticed is the JX is not getting that much ridership, and it pretty much covers the JPX route. So that has much less ridership. But is there anything that strikes you as interesting or odd?
What you just said about the JX is something that will be going into the next
Yeah.
phase, is to look closer at how those are being used and what they're providing. There was a comment from someone requesting that the JX go all the way down to the waterfront all day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was one person. It's hard when you read it to not put a lot of importance on it, but there was someone. I think just the most surprising thing to me, compared to other systems I've worked with, is the amount of people that are writing WestCat by choice. And not saying that they don't have another choice, but instead of driving. That's a very big opportunity and very helpful. And especially when we ask the non-writers, well, why aren't you, writing WestCat? Aside from the driving alternative, there was some, WestCat doesn't come near me, or it doesn't work during my hours. Well, that's something we can work with. That's something we can explore improving.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes it just doesn't go where you want to go. The other thing that I find interesting about all of this is the J's overall and the links are just really, really popular, and it points to the real necessity of having these feeder bus services.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, really important to,
Yeah.
I think, people here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Please go ahead.
Did you get any specific answers to the question number 30? Where would you like WestCat buses to go most?
Oh, yes, definitely. That's what I'm going to give Cameron in terms of the counts
Oh,
per,
I took
yes. Yeah, yeah.
I could get those, yeah.
These are just summarized because we got, 500.
Thank you. One question I have is, did safety stand out to you in both surveys, both for the riders and for the prospective riders? Because I didn't really see that stand out as sort of like, okay, maybe I would take WestCat more if
Yeah, I
it
mean,
was safer.
that was actually the lowest. They got the lowest proportion of people in the non-rider survey that said, that was an issue for them, and that's why they didn't ride.
Yeah.
So it stood out in that it wasn't a big deal. And there was also a fair amount of comments saying that the buses were really clean, which people often lump in with safety.
Yeah, that's why this comprehensive survey was so important, because sometimes you'll make assumptions about the culture of public transit, and this says different about at least our services.
Yeah.
So thank you. If there are no other questions, any public comments on this item? None? Oh, we do have one public comment. Please go ahead. Right over there, please. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you for the opportunity, and this study is great. It's data-driven, it's strong, and I see a lot of great information that can be used to analyze future changes for the WestCat service, or improvements, I would say. So I had, I'm going to have more time to actually read, but I just went through quickly on this, and thank you for the presentation. I see clearly that there's two different markets that the WestCat service serves. Basically, it's a local, very local market, and the regional, thanks to the J systems and the links, also the 30Z, and at some level, it would be the C3, C cubed, I think it is originally. So I see that there is potential, and it's great for everything, for improvements. So one question I had for the last part of the presentation is, if you have, it would be good, and maybe it's here, but I didn't see it, is a rate of response per ridership per route. So, because it could be that could be also very strong piece of information for decision making, and let me see what else. So we do have great information on productivity and what people want to want the routes to expand or to do in the future and to serve them better. So I think that this is going to be great for the next step of the study, where WestCat will go. In terms of the regional, it's interesting to see that they want to go to Martinez, to Berkeley. I imagine that is when there's basically no transit option to go to Berkeley or to, well, Martinez there is, but Diablo Valley College, for instance, there's no transit option. And Diablo Valley is one of the colleges that offers great transfer opportunities for, good universities. So they do have agreements. So I really think that this also, when you're making a decision, just try to look at equity, because we do have neighborhoods with low-income areas and communities that, by providing that transit access to a college that has strong agreements or strong connections with good reputation universities, would be something that you open up opportunities for the residents of West County, just to get a bus, to go there, instead of like transferring 4 times. Another source of, another thing to consider would be to take a look at the origin-destination pairs in the census, maybe where people live, where people work, and see if there is strong demand to actually provide service, or at least consider the provision of service for areas like 4th Street in Berkeley, for instance, the Amtrak station in Emeryville, where there is no BART service. There is, if you want to go there and if you work there and you have a car, or, God forbid, if you have a car but you don't, your car breaks down, or something, then there's no transit option, and the Uber and Lyft option would be very expensive. So those are the things that I would like to just, take a look at in the next step or phase of this study. This is a great piece of information, and I really commend the effort, and also the WestCat staff for actually getting into this study, getting their hands into this and looking at this data that is valuable to actually make decisions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comments? If there are none, I will bring it back to board for further comments or motions, though this is information only. Director Parsons.
I'd just like to kind of add one piece to what she was saying, and it was very interesting to see that the 30Z, only 24% of the people had a driver's license. So, and then the other one that had a high percentage of folks that didn't have a driver's license was the C-Cube to Contra Costa College, servicing a college. So it'd be really interesting to see a bus, and I've been advocating for this. I think Aleda has, I think other people have, without having to do multiple connections to Diablo Valley College at some point, because that's clearly a service of need. And as the 30Z may be the less populated bus, it was interesting to see only 24% of the people have a driver's license. So that's clearly a route that's needed for people of need that don't have access to a car. I mean, that's what I got out of that.
Yeah, I'll second that too. I mean, I went to both Contra Costa College, DVC, and if I had the option to take WestCat directly to DVC Pleasant Hill, I definitely would have. But I think what the data is showing here is that some folks don't even have that option, right? It's a matter of equal access, and folks from the service area, despite income level, ought to have that option to them. So definitely second that. Any other comments from? Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Ronnie Kraft, I just want to thank you for all this work. It's really tremendous. And I'm going to go through and read through your report again. It's just, I haven't seen this before for WestCat, and I really appreciate you really taking a deep dive into all these different areas. So thanks so much.
Thank you. It's fun.
Thank you. If there are no motions for this item, we'll move on to item 3.1. So thank you so much for coming in and sharing your presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Right. Item 3.1 is General Manager's Report. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So just a few brief items tonight. So in relation to one of the subjects that came up, we are about to embark on our schedule update for August, and that will coordinate with the BART changes that go into effect in the second week of August. So we are planning on changing our schedule to connect to the BART system there. We're also starting work on our upcoming budget, so we'll be bringing that to the board hopefully next month to have that discussion. Don't really have any updates on the FTA funding situation. We're still just working through that process. We're currently writing our grant and trying to get it into the system, and we shall see what happens as that kind of moves along. SB 63, which is the Scott Wiener regional ballot measure, potentially going on the ballot. So there's a lot of conversations going on. There's a lot of work being done at MTC with all individual agencies, with the Senator's office itself. The small East Bay operators had a meeting with the Senator staff in the last week to start to see if where our ask for funding was as part of the proposal. And we are specifically seeking that BART feeder bus funds kind of are held whole as moving forward, if that moves forward. So we'll keep you informed as that goes along. And then the last item is just a quick follow up on the information I sent over the last couple of days about the agenda item on the BART board about looking into the upcoming potential sale of the Hercules Transit Centre. I did share that the item was pulled before it was discussed today. I want to thank a number of directors who kind of reached out to BART staff, to BART directors, to WICTAC were helpful, CCTA, Tim Hale, and then I also did share that the comment letter that I did kind of it did actually get onto the public record. I wasn't sure it would because the way they did it, but it did actually end up on the public record. So it's an item that may come back in the future. I mean, hopefully it won't. I think there was a lot of comments made to part staff that made them realise that it was perhaps not the right time to be considering this potential action going forward. So we'll see. So that's all I have for tonight.
Thank you very much. If there are no questions or comments, we'll move to item 3.2, WCAT Representative Report. Director Hansen is not here, but Director Kelly, would you be able to give a report on that?
Actually, I'm not, because I was down in Burbank for a Cal Cities transportation meeting, so I was not at the last meeting. But I will say just that if you don't know, Contra Costa Transportation Authority has got $1 million from RM3 to do some outreach regarding the San Pablo Avenue multimodal project. And that would be along San Pablo Avenue through the cities of El Cerrito, Richmond, and San Pablo. And just talking to the people there, the businesses there about potential safety improvements and maybe eventually a bus rapid transit. So that'll be going out and you'll hear more about it.
Thank you, Director Kelly, and yeah, a lot of the directors or commissioners from that from WCAT couldn't make it because we had those policy committees in Burbank, but they did have sort of information-only meetings, so I can give a little bit of a brief over there. CCTA actually gave two presentations, the first on the countywide emergency evacuation plan, the second on the San Pablo Avenue multimodal corridor study, and the last one on regional mapping and wayfinding project from FDC. So that kind of detailed just an outline of timeline of the implementation of those wayfinding across these different transit agencies. So if you want to get the packet, feel free to reach out to me or go to the WCAT website. But that concludes the WCAT representative report. Do we have any correspondence for the meeting? Thank you.
Move on, I'd like to make a comment about the WCTAC, or
Sure.
WCTIC, whatever they want to call themselves today.
Tax still.
Well, well, you can get rid of the A, it's no longer a TAC, right?
Oh.
So, WCTIC. Anyways, when you guys are talking about that bus rapid transit, hopefully you can encourage them to expand that further up, be it to Pinole, be it to Hercules.
Dr. Kelly.
Can I respond to that? So the study is actually going, starting in Oakland, going through Emeryville. And as I understand it, Oakland and Emeryville might be interested eventually in a bus rapid transit, maybe a side-running bus rapid transit. As I understand right now, Berkeley and Albany are not. They have a lot of small businesses along the side. And so it will be a very, very long time before something like this happens. I don't think in this study the scope will be extended. But, in the future, we'll see what happens. I heard that to implement bus rapid transit, even in Oakland and Emeryville, could cost around $200 million. I mean, it's just really, really expensive. So this is just a first step. I'll probably be dead if this comes through.
No.
But you got to start somewhere, right?
Start somewhere and be hopeful, be hopeful for sure.
But I think it's really important to get the input of the businesses and the people who live along San Pablo Avenue. That's important.
That's going to provide all the information we need if we should move forward on that size of investment.
Yeah, and I will say I've taken tours in San Francisco, and that's what they have done along Van Ness and along Geary. They spent kind of years talking to the community, forming groups with the community before they really went forward with their BRT.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
It's conversation for, I think, off the board, because the question then is, and how is it working for them? San Francisco.
San Francisco. The Vanessa is very popular. It doesn't stop at every stop. It's a center running bus rapid transit. And it's basically about 10 minutes faster than taking the old bus or driving. But the important point is you feel like you're going faster, and that encourages more people to ride. Likewise, I only rode a little bit on the Geary. The Geary already has a rapid bus, but I think it improves maybe by 6 minutes, something like that.
Yeah, thank you. Very insightful. No other comments there. We'll move on to board communication items for future board meetings. Do we have any? All right, seeing that there is none, I'll go ahead and adjourn the WestCat board meeting to the next board meeting on Thursday, May 8th, 2025.